Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of Three Drams. As always, I'm your host, Matt Healy, pot stilled Matt, and I'm here to take you through the next about 45 minutes to an hour, talking about all things Irish whiskey, and of course, the three samples we have from Three Drams. This is episode 33. We have been going on every month for the last 34 months. So it is quite a stretch of time. And I'm delighted to have you guys here with us tonight. For this takeover from the guys at Cooley Distillery and Kilbeggan Distillery. And we have three fantastic whiskies for you this evening. We have our Tyrconnell 10-year-old single malt Madeira cask finish. We also have the Kilbeggan Triple Cask, and then Connemara 12-year-old single malt. I do want to say hello to the people in the comment section already. Garkov coming in from Germany. I am always delighted to see our German contingent saying hello to us this evening. Tina dropping in the second half of our German contingent here every month, and I'm delighted to see. I'm also seeing the tags on Instagram that your packs have been making out to you guys. But of course, remember, these are the fantastic boxes that go out to you every month. There's also a card here that comes with the box, gives you all the information about these whiskies. But of course, it cannot be executed. It can't happen without the guys at Irish Malt and Three Drams, who package up all these whiskies and organize all of these fantastic guests every month and get them to your house, to your door, all across the world. I'm seeing JB saying hi from London, Marissa saying hello from Maynooth, Vitaly saying hello from Dublin. Then we also have Martin in from Cove, Olivia in from Clare, in from the south of Dublin specifically. I always appreciate specificity. Alan in from Galway, and Martin, of course, coming in from Dublin as well. Do say hello to us in the comment sections, guys. But we are always delighted to see you here. But I am aware, as always, that you're not here to listen to me because we have three fantastic whiskies. And as always, we bring you the flavor makers and creators of these whiskies for you to be able to ask your questions and also enjoy as we go along. So I am very glad to welcome Blending and Distillery Manager from Cooley Distillery, Sarah Dowling. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Sarah?
Hi, Matt. Hello, everyone. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. It's a lovely evening here in Dublin. Three lovely whiskies. I know you've had a busy day. So I appreciate you joining us on the show.
No worries at all. Happy to be here.
So it's a takeover. So usually we have three guests who come and join us for three whiskies, or a whiskey each. But we have you for the whole evening. So I'm delighted to welcome you in. This show works best as we go through all the whiskies together. But of course, in the comment section, guys, ask the questions that all your burning questions that you want to know, because Sarah and myself, well, I'm not really here. I'm here to entertain and co-host along, but Sarah is joining us to talk to us about these whiskeys. So the questions and comments you have, please let us know. And in the meantime, I'm going to just open my dram number 1 here. There you go. And I'm going to fill up the glass. And then in the meantime, I suppose, do you want to tell us a little bit about how all three of these whiskies fall under the same house that we're going to be trying this evening?
Yeah. So all of these whiskies are, so it's three different brands. All of these whiskies are part of Beam Suntory, Kilbeggan, Tyrconnell, and Connemara. But the link of all these whiskies is that all of these whiskies are actually distilled in Cooley Distillery, fully. So what we're trying first is we can say the brands and stuff. It's not blind, is it?
No, it's not blind. No,
it is, right. So this one is Tyrconnell 10-year-old single malt. So single malt from plain unpeated single malt from Cooley Distillery, and then it's finished in Madeira casks for like a year plus. So depending on when it's ready. So
or have a little nose here as I sláinte.
Sláinte, yeah, absolutely. That's good. So basically it's kind of, yes, the plain single malt from Cooley Distillery. Tyrconnell is kind of the brand that we would kind of use for our unpeated single malt. And then so it's a real the malt from Cooley Distillery, it's really like fresh and fruity. There's like kind of a really crisp apple note when it's at the younger age. At 10 years plus, it's kind of starting to get a little bit more of that richness. So there's those kind of like crisp, like apple juice, I always think of it. And there's a really nice kind of around almond note in it when it's younger. But as it gets to 10 years old, it's really, really starting to sweeten up. And that's helped by the Madeira. So this like apple note is double distilled, is starting to sweeten up into more of a stewed apple, and the almond note is starting to turn, for me anyway, certainly when I'm nosing it, it turns more into like starting to get into a marzipan, I suppose. And yeah, there's that like real like fruit injection then that I think comes from the Madeira.
So you take your Tyrconnell base, so your kind of bourbon matured Tyrconnell, for those 10 years in bourbon, and then afterwards it's moved in, and it's part of kind of a trio, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's port, sherry, and a Madeira 10-year-olds as well as the bourbon. Is that correct?
Yeah. So our 10-year-old range it's a standard range, not limited time offering. These are kind of the standard part of the Tyrconnell range. Port, sherry, and Madeira. Yeah. So we actually, it's interesting. We just bottled them on site last week. And that's always such a fun, like we'll do a pretty big run, but it's always such a fun time. We tend to do them together as well. So we're nosing, like getting cask samples of sherry finish from the cask, and it's our first time like to really taste the sherry, because once we put it into the cask, we just leave it. We don't know what's going to happen. And then we'll do port, and then we'll do Madeira. So I spend a lot of that week. I sample every single cask. And pass it, and then kind of have to then pass it then for the bottle, and then every time we move between, so if we're moving from the bottling hall between a Tyrconnell to a Tyrconnell sherry finish, I have to try it to pass it to make sure that there's no sherry taint on the port bottling, for example. So it's always good times for me in the distillery when where I get plenty of opportunities to take samples. So yeah, it's great.
When you're evaluating those casks, say be Madeira in this case, and you're going cask to cask for a vatting like this, I suppose, do you have like a tolerance in your head as to the flavor? Because obviously, if you're doing a single cask and one cask has a kind of a lesser impact of flavor or maybe color, you might reject that or leave it to stay a little bit longer. Well, maybe won't be picked as a single cask, but in a kind of a core bottling, I presume there's a tolerance level because it goes in with maybe bigger, bolder casks or deeper color casks.
Absolutely. So the first thing I'm doing when you get those samples, so what we do is we just, when the casks are picked, they might be still down in the warehouse at this point though, we'll have them out on the pallets, and we'll go down with I'm going down with glasses and our Valinch, so we can sample from the cask. And between myself and the team, kind of our team of operators, and the assistant blender as well, now Aidan, that works with us, we're taking samples from every single cask, nosing it, potentially tasting it right there in the warehouse. So we're at that point where just really looking for off notes, anything that really, if that's where you'll pick up if the cask itself, I mean, we've nosed the cask before we've used it, or we've nosed the spirit before it's gone in, but that's where you're saying, right, something not marry. It's too cold to really pick up any the flavor notes that we're kind of getting here right now. It's too cold, and there's too much happening around you in the warehouse. Really, you're in a warehouse full of other casks, so you're not really at that point looking for nuances between casks. You're just saying, right, okay, is it okay to take it to the next step? So then I'll bring up a glass of each up to my sensory room and let it warm up a little bit, kind of put lids on everything, and then at that point, after maybe around an hour, I'm starting to nose every individual cask, making sure the color is right, making sure that there's those like root flavors that I'm looking for are there, and then I'll be able to chat to the lads and be like, right, okay, they're all good for, or maybe one we'll send back and we'll leave it for another year or so. So you're kind of you're nosing it, you're on a journey with it the whole time. You're passing it, and then you're passing it again, and that's when you really get to look at like the differences between the casks as well, because even though it won't have been in there for it'll have been batted together and then split out into casks. Still, even the short maturation time, you'll see quite a lot of differences between. So I'm reducing them down again to like maybe 20%. To really start to see the difference. So I'll pass them for bottling, but I'm still interested. I might be still going back to them for the rest of the day, basically.
And would they be essentially in parcels that you've laid down at one time that you'd be looking at, or do you kind of cherry pick between ages and parcels and maybe locations of Madeira?
Yeah, a little bit of both, to be honest. I'll do them in every year. I'm getting casks. It's normally this time of year we'll fill those casks. So you kind of have to find that's blending really. You're trying to have to find the balance between, you don't want to take something too young, you don't want to take something to leave it for too long, but you also don't want to be doing a different Madeira finish every year. So you're kind of trying to find that balance. So we do a little bit of pilot blending as well, like just in the sensory room, just being like, right, okay, if I mix these few casks together, what's that taste like? Yep, good, right. So that sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. You're trying to you don't want to be only like, right, these are what I put in the cask last year and this is what I'm using, because they mightn't be ready. They might be such a unique flavor to themselves that next year's lot will taste differently or too different. So yeah, you're trying to just find that wee balance.
And when you have, I suppose, like you said, like now is the time of year that these Madeiras come in. It's obviously very scheduled in an operation as big as Cooley. Because I think sometimes people think of distilleries as, a lot of the romantic one-man show distilleries where there's kind of casks lying around in the corner. And obviously, larger distilleries are far more organized, shall we say. Do you find it... do you find an ability in that organization to bring in kind of external casks to experiment with as well, or is it more scheduled just for the core range bottlings that you look at?
A bit of both. So I've been really lucky in the past couple of years. So one of the things that I'm really picky about is casks. I want to make sure I'm working with suppliers that I know, and I know more about the casks, and that's becoming more and more important. We're putting this beautiful spirit into it. I want to be careful about what I'm putting it into. So over the past few years, the beauty of being part of Beam Suntory and Suntory itself is that we're very closely linked to the Scottish blending team. And then we're very closely linked to the Japanese and the American blending team. So contacts that have been cultivated, you can kind of piggyback a little bit and kind of being able to work within the group. So in the past year, Ron Welsh, the master blender for Scotch, he was retired at the end of last year, but he had a year-long handover with Callum, his replacement. So, and that whole year for me was about just taking as much knowledge. I'd been kind of always worked really closely with Ron, but that year I was like, right, okay, I have a deadline here. I need to make sure I just like squeeze every bit of knowledge out of his brain that I possibly can. So we were able to kind of go on a few trips together over to Bordeaux and Burgundy and Porto in the past year. We've done a little bit every year, if you know what I mean, but it was a little bit more concentrated last year, trying to get kind of all of his contacts for me to meet them and Cam to meet them, and for us to try different casks and kind of be able to kind of develop our own knowledge and our own flavors and our own things that we wanted. And yeah, even though probably Cooley is bigger maybe than the average Irish distillery, it was still tiny compared to, like certain Scotch distilleries or even the biggest Irish distilleries. So I have to be careful about if I'm ordering casks. I want to make sure I'm just from a supply chain point of view. I don't want to be taking 10 casks from one place and shipping that in a container and 5 casks from another place. So I'm trying to build up partnerships with people so we can kind of work together almost. So that's how that works. And then that gives you an opportunity then to take a few innovative casks in and maybe one or two at a time and do some trials, I suppose. So yeah, that's how it is a process though. You kind of have to have, like, you end up with a big warehouse of casks that you have to really keep track of what happens where and when. And I'm always revisiting it, even when we're not, bottling for the finishes, because if you lose track of it, it becomes a beast to get your head around.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you need to look out for or keep an eye on with Madeira compared to like sherry or port? Or is there, maybe more sulfur in the process and the transport that you want to make sure there's no one dropping sulfur candles in, or is there different different aspects that from other casks you keep an eye on, or is it all kind of much of the same?
Well, that's something you need to be quite careful about anyway. For whenever you're buying casks, you need to be very particular, make sure that those boundaries are there. I mean, Madeira at the moment is just availability of casks, like kind of being able to get your name high enough on the list that you get the casks when they're freshly emptied, and that that there was Madeira, that there was Madeira recently in them. So that's the priority, and that's the Suntory ethos. The Suntory ethos, the Beam Suntory ethos is quality. If we can't get quality Beam Suntory casks or quality Madeira casks, we're not necessarily going to be buying.
Yeah, of course.
High quality casks.
No, it was funny. I was buying casks this week. Kind of like you said, connections and relationships are really important. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't a person. Someone put me in contact with this Amarone maker, and I was trying to. It was kind of a friend of a friend, and I kind of ended up in the conversation, and I was asking about the sulfur content, obviously wanting the lesser as possible of sulfur contents, and they misunderstood and thought I wanted as much sulfur as possible. Oh, and they were like, well, our normal wine is 70 milligrams of SO2 per liter. They're like, and we usually put like either SO2 gas into the cask or a sulfur candle, but they're like, we can do everything. We can give you a really high SO2 wine, inoculate the whole cask with sulfur gas, and put a sulfur candle in. And I was like, this is catastrophically a nightmare for me. It's like you've grossly misunderstood what I wanted from this relationship.
None of that, please.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, and it is all about. That's what I've learned, and that's what when we weren't able to travel quite as readily, it became it's quite difficult, because how can you buy casks if you've not at least been there and seen the bodega you're getting them from, or met the person you're buying them from? If you're relying on someone's word over an email, there's a risk there, eh? Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And I know, like you said at the beginning, that when you're opening the casks and you're lining them up for vatting, you're looking for faults at top level. Yeah. And I assume 10 years ago you were looking for production faults. So this here now is maturation faults for these specific finishing casks, I presume, is what you're looking for.
Absolutely, yeah. So I suppose false isn't really the right word. You're looking for just something that doesn't quite vibe, because it might. We know that good spirit went into the cask. Because we've done a decant and we've nosed that spirit, and we know that the cask is good because I've bought it and I've nosed it before we put any spirit into it. So, but some things just don't work, right? So I have a couple of casks in the warehouse, and actually it was funny. There's 2 casks that I, like you say, that I bought, just like let's give it a try, throw them in, and that was 5 years ago, and it just didn't work at all. And it was a great experiment, because I know that that's never a direction I'm going to go in, but I still have these 2 casks that I'm trying to figure out what to do with. And I just out of pure curiosity, I asked someone, bring me up a sample of those 2. And one of them I still hate. And the other one I'm like, oh, turns out 5 years is just long enough for me to think I've been able to use this in something. So it's just about, does it vibe together? Does it work together? And I suppose as well, like if you're pretty confident that the sherry will work, but sometimes, or the Madeira will work, or the port will work with it because you've done it before. But sometimes you can find that it's just been in the cask for too long as well. So you're doing that kind of, or maybe not long enough, or so that's it's hard to explain what you're looking for, but you know it
when you find it.
When you find it, or when you don't find it.
Yeah. I had an experience. I trialed 2 casks of a certain type, and I hated them after about a year. And I slowly started teaspooning like a liter into the net, whatever you're doing, a main run of like 10,000 liters, and I go, right, here's 3 liters to try. And we wore down 1 cask, and I think by the time it came around, I checked on the second cast, like, a year and 8 months later or something. It took like, I was teaspooning it into stuff. And after that, like 8 months, the extra 8 months, it didn't taste phenomenal, but it tasted much better than it had. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe this just needed that extra maturation to, like you said, the 5-year mark. And you're like, oh yeah, I was like, this actually wasn't half bad at all.
Yeah, but like, if it takes 5 years, that's still a failure in my book. Do you know that kind of way? I suppose it's whiskey and you have a long time, but you need to be, I don't know, you need to be like, at least try and have a good indication before that.
Yeah.
Or something, yeah, because that whiskey's now really quite old.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, why don't we tie up
the
tail end of this Tyrconnell? I'm going to do a final little nose, final little sip. I know everyone's been calling it a fruit bomb at this point.
Exactly, yeah, it is so fruity, isn't it? It's so refreshing. Like for me, these ones are like almost like summer drinks. Like the Madeira is like your spring summer whiskey.
It's crisp as well, is what I like about it. It's bright, fruity, and crisp.
Yeah, it's so good.
46% ABV, if I'm not mistaken.
46%, yeah. So that's slightly stronger ABV. I've added a little bit of water to it. For me, 46%. Like some people love it like that, and that's what and it is right for the when it comes into the glass and when it comes, out of the bottle. But for me, if I'm sipping it, I'm always putting in a little bit of water. But I don't know. That's just how I like to drink whiskey.
Very understandable. I mean, for the fact that you're usually in the lab at 20%, I think this is probably a jump up.
No, yeah, it must be that actually. Do you pick up the marzipan note that I mentioned? It's kind of like right towards the back of my nose when I pick it up.
I see your kind of almond tickle at the back,
like sweet almond.
I'm not. See, whenever I think of marzipan, I think of that like queen cake, the like 4 square. That's usually where I go in my head because I'm not eating marzipan every day.
Yeah, sometimes I do when I see a Christmas cake. I'm like, I need to remind myself what marzipan tastes like because I always use it. But maybe I'm thinking like an almond croissant. Like
I could definitely see an almond croissant. Yeah.
Okay, maybe that's my tasting note. Marzipan's a bit too intense.
It's no, I like it. It's interesting. As I said, I try to explain to people that obviously like taste is subjective, but compound tastes I find very helpful because people say to me sometimes like, I remember at an evaluation sitting down, someone said it tasted like Chewits fruit salad, and then they were like, I'm really sorry, that's a stupid tasting note. And I was like, no, it's not. I was like, write it down. We'll look up what the flavor of Chewits fruit salad is later.
Yeah.
And we looked it up, and it was there's like 3 ingredients. It's vanilla, pineapple, and raspberry.
Oh.
And they're the flavor mixture of these sweets. So you can break down like that. But when I think of marzipan, I think of the queen cake, and then you're saying almond croissants. Like even that in itself has a myriad of flavors, that you can draw down from. And I think it's funny speaking to people who assume you can't say things like, bubblegum or Chewits fruit salad.
I know. I feel like there's no bad taste. I agree. And like one of the things that I find sometimes a little bit of a challenge is that, like, if I go first, people tend to agree with me, and it's based on nothing. It's just because they know that that's what I do for a living. But I'm like, no. You tell me. You go first because I want to hear what because if I'm always going first and telling people what I think and people are saying, oh yeah, I get that. Oh yeah, I get that too. Then I'm not getting the new, like the fruit salad revelation, or, it kind of helps my tasting note writing as well if I hear other people's, or I'm like, oh yeah, God, I was looking only at the marzipan and I didn't notice this other wonderful flavor that was right under. So it's always a little bit political when I have people in the sensory room with me, because I'm trying to get them to express themselves with it, and they're trying to just be like, just tell me, Sarah, just tell me what I'm tasting, And I'm like, no, but you tell me first. And then I'm like, oh, no, none of that.
I like even what I would do when you're saying even like the writing of tasting notes or trying to make it relatable. That one of the things I always find funny in the US is Irish whiskey ambassadors and salespeople love saying Christmas cake for anything that's remotely wine cask. But the Americans don't have, like, the Americans have a Christmas cake. It's not whatever our, rather than Christmas cake, more like fruit, like whatever you call fig pudding or whatever the Christmas,
Yeah.
not cake, but the one you set on fire, whatever one that one is.
Yeah. Plum pudding.
Plum pudding, yes, Christmas pudding. And we say that all the time, but the Americans don't have that.
Yeah.
So they say it like it exists, but only that their like 90-year-old grandmother has, and no one's ever eaten it. So that tasting note doesn't land. And one thing particularly with, like, you work with the Japanese a lot, I used to love giving whiskeys to the Japanese and then asking that, like, in far-flung places, and asking them about their tasting notes, because they're telling you about, like, oh, this reminds me of ume. And you're like, what is it like? What does an ume taste like? And because our lived experiences and our, recollection period are different, for me in the consumer facing side, having a different language to bring to tastings is quite helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially when you're crossing cultural boundaries as well, and language, like different languages and stuff. It can be really interesting, but then it's also interesting what different people pick up as well. Like even when you take the language and the references out of it, it's mad, the different things, the different smells, the different things that different people smell. Another really interesting one is when I set up the little nosing test in work. Sometimes if I'm feeling a little bit playful, I might put out the jars with the esters in them, and let people come in and test out their nose. And I used to do it in my office because I used to just try, and especially during COVID when it was really lonely and wanted people to come in and talk to me, I'd be like, "There's this sensory things out." But I actually can't be in the room when people are doing it, because they do this thing which is really funny, where they're like, "I know it. No, I know exactly what it is. I smelled it yesterday." And I'm like, "Great, what is it?" And they're like, "Couldn't tell you." And then I might know it's vinegar, or something like, for example.
Yeah.
And I can't help myself. And I'm like, think about if you're coming home from the pub and you're going for a chippy, and they're like, yeah, no idea. Salt, fried stuff. And then eventually I'm like, "It's vinegar." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I knew that." And I'm like, "But you didn't know that." "No, I did. I told you I knew it." No, but you never said it. So
I mean, having a head blender staring at you while you're trying to evaluate scents, I'm sure, is also intimidating upon itself.
Maybe. Well, these are people that work with me, so they know they know the true story. But it's just funny when you're like, and then people are so sure, they're like, no, I got that. I knew it was something minty. I'm like, you didn't say that. So yeah, it's fun. Fun for me, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we as I said, everyone's evaluation of spirit is subjective, and we get a little bit different. Vinegar, I hope I would at least nail. If no other scent, I hope.
You would think, but the amount of times, because you don't really smell vinegar without the whole full sensory visual experience, right? Without chips and everything else around you. So you don't actually smelling vinegar on its own. It's not something most people do. So then when you smell something completely unique, and then you're like, "Oh my god!" It can be hard. And I think that's where you can have a good nose, but if you can't actually verbalize and describe what you're saying and make decisions off the back of that, that's the difference, I suppose.
Well, on that, why don't we jump into whiskey number 2, Kilbeggan Triple Cask. I have a lovely Kilbeggan whiskey sitting behind me. It is not the Triple Cask, but I thought I might as well.
That's the shop. That's from the Kilbeggan, is it?
It certainly is. Lovely 10-year-old cask strength bourbon cask.
Yeah.
That clearly is lasting not too long in my house.
Yeah. That's the distillery bottler, your own one, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is Quebec. This is the single grain one here.
Oh, fantastic. So yes, tell us about this triple cask as we dive our noses into it. So I invite everyone who has the packs at home with them, throw the nose in,
Yeah.
and I suppose listen along, enjoy along, sip along.
So yeah, I have such a soft spot for this one. Quebec Triple Cask. It's rebranded. It's the old single grain, Quebec single grain.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's single grain whiskey from Cooley Distillery. Even though it's grain, it's quite a complicated blend of different grain ages and cask finish types. So triple cask, we've got bourbon, fully bourbon matured casks. We've got American virgin oak, and we've got sherry PX casks. So liquid has been matured in those individual casks, and then we're blending it together. We also have a really large span of ages. So we have some quite old grain, as old as 20 years old in it, and still some quite young as 4 and 5 year olds. So it's really complicated to blend it, and I just find it so beautiful. It's really like those vanilla notes. Again, I'm getting quite a lot of pineapple today. Orange peel, yeah. I saw someone did grass and orange peel, yeah. So 43%. On your mouth, then there's real woody note. Then when you're kind of the influence of the cask, you can feel it in the mouth feel massively. A real easy drinker. Personally, for me, I love this on its own, but I will also put it with, if I'm making it into a long drink, I put in some Coke and lime in it. But it makes a mean whiskey sour. Like the fact that it's a grain whiskey, it means it takes a mix well, it takes a cocktail well. But the fact that there's sherry and there's PX and bourbon, it means that it really does add something to the cocktail. It's not just a passive participant, in my opinion. So yeah.
And how would this have different for the old Quebec and single grain? Or is it just the same? Because from memory, the old Quebec single grain had like 7 or 8 casks in it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I chased that around in a lot of bars in the US trying to get. Still think is one of my favorite single grains. So does it differ much, or have I misremembered the cask regimen of the old single grain?
It doesn't differ a huge amount. It's still very much the bones of that's what it is. We've streamlined the casks a little bit just to make it as they're not competing with each other as much. So it is all about, we're championing the bourbon, the virgin oak impact, I think, is really, really important in this, and then the sherry finish as well. So it doesn't differ a huge amount, but it's more about kind of a slightly streamed down recipe, because I felt like sometimes the other one was it could just jumble a wee bit in my head, because there was some rum casks and some Madeira casks in there, and sometimes they just jarred a little bit too much, I thought, with it wasn't championing the sherry as much as I wanted it to. So yeah, but it's very, very much very similar. Yeah.
And when you're coming to working with malt versus grain, are you casking at different ABVs, or do you do much different in preparation for them, or are they pretty homogenous as you set them down, or you lay them down?
Yeah, we're not doing a huge amount differently. It's slightly higher ABV going into the grain goes in at a slightly higher ABV, but they're quite similar. We're still reducing down the grain a lot more into the 60s. It comes off the still at 94.5%. But we use, I don't know if we're unique, but I know that definitely maybe we're unusual. So we first fill bourbons, second fill bourbons. We fill the bourbons 4 times. We'll reuse them 4 times. But some people don't put grain into new fill casks, whereas we do. And I feel like I think that's why you can really get that really strong woody note, that really nice like maturation note that we're using a full variety of cask types.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great tongue prickle from that virgin oak as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And we also we treat all our casks the same way. So in Cooley Distillery, like I always think of our quality, our building blocks of quality. So we've got excellent new mixed spirit coming off the stills. I nose the new mix spirit every week, every single charge. I nose, and I nose it again a few more times. I'll nose it on a monthly basis. So we know we've got great spirit. We buy excellent casks. Most of the 95%, other than the finishing casks, everything else is from Jim Beam. So we're using excellent casks. And then we've excellent warehouses as well. Most of our warehousing is all on site. We mature a small amount down in Kilbeggan, but they're identical warehouses. They're fit for purpose. I was in one of the warehouses today, and it was colder inside the warehouse than it was outside. And I'll go down to the warehouse at Christmas time or at winter time in the depths of winter. So in the depths of winter, that really, really cold spell back in December, we do all of our stock taking in December for some awful reason. So I spent a lot of time in warehouses in December, freezing cold. And in that cold spell, it was much warmer inside the warehouse than it was outside. So that's the kind of, what?
I was going to say, do they stay at like a constant 5 degrees or something? Or
yeah, but it's not temperature controlled. It's just that they're really well built, I suppose. And then we're quite close to the sea as well. So like I live in Dundalk, and I'd be leaving the house at that time. I'd be leaving the house. It might be -5 degrees in the car. By the time I get out to the peninsula and beside the sea, it could be -2. And then, you know, once you're into with warehouses, it's definitely above freezing, or like above zero. So yeah, so they're kind of our building blocks of quality, like excellent spirit, excellent casks, really good water, and maturing in good warehouses that are pretty stable. They're all identical to each other. So, and we treat our grain casks the exact same way as we treat our malt casks, you know.
Let me ask this. You're saying that you use your bourbons through to a 4th fill. I've heard from blenders or people who are giving me advice over the years that you can use 2nd or 3rd fill malt casks for grain, but they would never use 2nd fill grain casks for malt. Would you ever? Would you? No,
yeah, never. Yeah, no. I use.
Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, or?
I suppose I've never really tried it, but logically for me, if there's a certain amount of in drink as well, and there's definitely an interaction and a conversation that happens between the liquid and the wood over the maturation time. So if you put grain in a cask, why would you put malt in on top? Why would you empty and then put malt in on top of that? Yeah,
I don't know. You're the blender, not I.
It just doesn't sit with me. I suppose not that anything is a lesser or superior quality. They're just different, right?
Yeah.
Like I would never use once I've filled a cask with peated whiskey, I would never then put plain whiskey in on top of that, unless I was looking for like a peated finish or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just part of that's the rules you set out, right? When you're making your rules and your quality rules. Maybe people do that? Like, have you ever tried something that's been in a grain?
So I've been around grain that has matured in 2nd fill bourbons that previously held malt. So they discouraged the malt, and then had a new make grain and wanted something in B2s. Didn't have any grain B2s, so they took the malt B2s and then just filled them with grain and put them in the racking. But then I've also been around people who need B2s for malt and have amplitudes of empty grain casks, and they won't go near them. And it's funny because you said that was going to be my next question. You wouldn't put grain on top of you wouldn't put malt on top of a grain cask. But does the opposite hurt you as much as the grain on the malt on the grain does?
No, is there? And I can't. It's interesting. You're asking me these questions, and I don't have a logical answer for you. I just have a gut feel, right? But we don't put malt in former grain casks. But I can see a world where I would be more comfortable putting
grain into a malt
into a former malt cask, and it makes perfect sense to me in my head, and I'm really annoyed at myself that I can't verbalize why. But I think, but also like what you have to remember in my job is innovation is a pretty small but really important part of it. But my job is flavor continuity. So if we're blending Kilbeggan, like I'm not out there to make changes. I want every bottle of Kilbeggan you try to be the same or within a really recognizable taste profile as a previous one. So when there's and that follows the whole way through. Like I feel like my role is strengthening rules.
Yeah, but I mean, this could be a rule. You know, if you make more grain than malt, then theoretically you would have more B2s of grain than malt. So you could make it every blender has to row back in B2s and B3s and B4s into their blending profiles in whatever ratios they fill in. You could theoretically just take a section of B2s from grain and make them B2s from malt. I'm just being devil's advocate here. I don't care what you think.
Theoretically you could. It wouldn't probably happen somewhere where I'm the blender.
Well, that was
maybe we'll do a trial. Maybe next time I chat to you, I'm like, you know what? I feel like you rattle the foundations of all of my beliefs, and we put one. And I'm gonna we'll do a blind tasting someday. Someday I'll see you, and I'll have a cast sample. I'm like, Matt, sit down here now. Because it's probably it's probably right that it's probably worth, if I have this like unshakable belief, have I really tested it? No, not really. But yeah, I would only test it a small batch.
I only asked because I never working with spirit. I never had the opportunity to do it. I would normally focus on whatever malt and pot still, and grain would have been behind that, and would have been usually fine. But it was just I've had like 3 blenders say it to me.
I know,
but none of them could tell. But none of them could tell me why.
Yeah,
but they're like, just don't do it.
I know. Like, do you understand my kind of visceral?
Yeah, no, that's why I asked. I'm just poking fun.
No, it's fine. It's good.
But on the other side, like you said about you don't put unpeated whiskey into peated casks. No. I have done it. I've built an entire product range or a product out of that because places I was working didn't make peated malt, but I wanted to get in front of specifically European consumers that are just obsessed with Scotch whiskey, and Scotch whiskey is the only thing that exists. And every whiskey show, someone comes up and is like, I only drink peated whiskey. So I wanted to do something for that consumer. And putting unpeated whiskey into this heavily peated whiskey cask, I found it very interesting. It came out almost smoked rather than peated. It's very, very different to the base whiskey that went in. It'd be a very recognizable brand that is not one of your brands.
I've tried cask like that as well. Like I've tried cask samples from that, and it is fascinating that it's a completely different type of smoke. And it's not peat, it's smoke, very much so. And it's nice. It's not. I don't think it's bad. It's a different iteration, and it's a different expression of. It's similar to having a sherry finish. I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it wouldn't be. I suppose if you're, again, coming back to like the scale I work at, that rule will be in place, not because the outcome would be bad, but you've just lost control, right? If you start throwing stuff into any cask, as a distillery manager, the minute you lose control, that's when you have a problem. So if you don't have a really structured rules, then you don't really have control of what's going on in your distillery, and you can't really predict it. So if I was trying to,
that's what I'm saying, sir. Just write into the rules. Just make it consistent.
I know.
Take 2,000 E2s from grain every year and put them in front of the malt truck, and then it's a rule.
I don't think you understand how uncomfortable you're making me, Matt. I love the rules. I think.
Well, I said make it a rule. You love the rule. It's just another one of your sacred rules. That's all.
I think, I think if you get a group of blenders together, you find it probably a lot of people who have a lot of faith in the rules. I was lucky enough to get to go to a Suntory-wide blenders conference at the start of the year, and we're all very similar people. Yeah, I was like, I don't know, does Suntory and Beam Suntory hire a certain type of person to be a blender, or is it only a certain type of person who's just absolutely insane enough to want to be a blender? But we're a room full of people all over the world, all different ages, all different backgrounds, and we were the same person, which is lovely, actually. But
that's what I was going to say. Do they hire all the same type of people, or all the same type of people just want to be blenders?
I don't think they hire the same type of people, because we were all different lengths of service and different that would be such a big brother, I think. Do you know, that kind of way? I just don't see a world where that would happen, because different hiring managers. I think it's like the same type of person wants to be a blender and probably is a good blender. Do you know, that kind of way? But
before we jump onto our last whiskey, I want to ask you about that. Of that conference, how many people would have been there, and what would have been the gender split?
How many people were there? There was, I'd say, probably around 15 people there, and two women, and it was so that was probably but both of us we got it was so nice actually to walk into the room and see another female blender that you can be like, oh, it's you. And we got on really well. We all got on really well. But I suppose the demographics are probably like also probably the youngest there, so it's definitely, the world is changing quite a lot in that regard. But so, and then what was your other question?
No, that was both of them answered. When I speak to a lot of companies, I hear the kind of this sentence thrown around a lot, that women have far superior olfactory senses than men. So I was just wondering, because, and if you look at Ireland, I guess to some degree, there's a lot of female blenders or in Ireland, in Carlow now, Sarah Martin, who came from Diageo, is kind of one of my, when I think of Scotland, of the kind of famous blenders, she was up there. So I was just wondering what the room looked like, or if that was just I was just inquiring.
Yeah, no, it was like a really diverse room, actually. Taking aside the fact that there was two women there was great. I don't think in rooms like that in any company 20 years ago there would have been any women in there. But definitely representative of, like, we had tequila makers who were amazing. I have a whole newfound love and respect for the tequila making industry that I never had before. Well, not that I never had before, but it just totally opened my world. We had an amazing mixture of people there. It was great to get together, and I think as well that was only the top for each of the arms of the company. Like, there is definitely, like, while there was only two women in the room, there's definitely women that are huge parts of all the blending teams around the world.
As I said, I'm just being nosy. Time for a whiskey number 3. This is Evergaw Connemara 12-year-old single malt. Whiskey I haven't had the aged expression of Connemara in like 10 years. It was one I adore. I know exactly when the last time I had it was in the Palace Bar. I walked in, didn't know. It was one of my first times in the Palace Bar ordering whiskey. I didn't know they only served Irish whiskey. So I walked in and someone was like, I already want a peated whiskey. And I ordered a scotch and basically got laughed at by the bartender. Was like, Irish only. And he pulled out a bottle of Connemara 12 and he was like, you'll be fine with this.
Nice.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about it as I pour this dram here?
So this is 12-year-old Connemara. So peated single malt from Cooley Distillery. So it will be really interesting if you have any of your Tyrconnell left. These are sister spirits, right? They're sister malts. They're both single malts from Cooley Distillery. They have different mash bills, but made in all the same equipment. So worth comparing, like nosing one and nosing the other. And you also see the kind of the hop on in age as well. So again, like the 12-year-old is very faintly peated. For a peated whiskey, it's so much more lightly peated than the Connemara, even though it's the same cask, just older. The crispy notes, those apple notes, those kind of a Sidona note sometimes that you pick up in the younger of the malt. It's sweetened up massively. It's a really, really sweet stewed apple. It's really quite a viscous, oily spirit in the glass. And so much sweeter. Still has that, you can pick up the malty backbone more in the 12-year-old than you can in the original Connemara. because the peated kind of peatiness, is that the word? The phenol level really seems to be kind of sweetening up and dropping off.
And as general, is that a rule of peated whiskies and phenols that they tend to evaporate as the years get older and you get more kind of the malt flavors coming through, or?
I don't know, actually, to be honest. I know it's 100% true in the Connemara. And as you get even older than that, it becomes like a really, really subtle, soft sweetness.
And is this, my apologies, is this a full maturation in bourbon, yeah?
Yeah.
There's the famous water jug.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, still the same one. The milk jug. So that's actually, speaking of my utensils, I was picking out my glasses for this evening, and I was thinking that we're doing the full range of Beam Suntory Irish. So I said I try and reflect that in my glassware. So I've got a Kilbeggan Glencairn nosing glass that I used for the Tyrconnell. And then I recently was gifted this one. It's the Kentucky Bourbon glass. I'm trying to think. So it's Kentucky Distillers Association gave me a gift of this. So this was designed by, I think, the Bourbon Master Blenders. So that's the Kentucky, how they like to nose their whiskey. And then this is the Hackshu distillery glass. So I've been lucky enough to, you can only get this if you've been to Hackshu Distillery, buy it there. So I'm trying to represent Beam Suntory in my glassware. But
I was going to say I went to Yamazaki. I didn't get to Hackshu, and was great to see a bottle of Kilbeggan on the wall.
Yeah, and Connemara. Connemara is in Yamazaki as well.
Right. That's what I meant. The Connemara at the time was what it was. Their showcases. Connemara on the wall.
Yeah, same. I was delighted to see that too.
It was very good, and it was very funny because at the time I knew I was going to Japan, and I might have told you this in the last time we were chatting, but about 8 months out, I paid for my tour and everything, but I went through Beam Suntory. Like I called Beam Suntory Ireland, got them to call someone in Suntory, and I was like, I'm going to be on this tour at this time. I have no problem paying for it. Just I want to be, because I know they book out months and months and months in advance. And there was a couple of Aussies on my tour, and they were asking me about the Connemara on the walk. They heard my accent, and they were like, "Why is this? We're having a chat or whatever."
Yeah.
And I was like, "How?" And there was a couple of Americans, and I said, "The Americans, how long in advance did you book the tour?" And they were like, "Oh, we booked it like a year out." And I was like, "Yeah, I was about like 8 months out." And we said to the Aussies, "What about you guys?" And they said, "No, we just showed up this morning." And we were like, "What do you mean you showed up this morning?" And they were like, "Well, we're staying in a hotel." And there was a Australian guy at the front desk. We asked him, could we come here? And he said, no, it books out 6 months in advance. But he said the Japanese are too polite. So if you show up and just tell them that you've traveled 10,000 miles to come, they'll just let you on the tour. And that's exactly what they did. They doorstepped Yamazaki and just pleaded with, and just were like, we came from across the oceans. And they were like, oh, please, yes, come on our tour. So it was very interesting.
Such kind people. Yeah, we have actually some Suntory visitors on site at the moment, today and tomorrow. And I was just out for dinner with them after work, and I had told them, I was like, I really want to come for dinner with you guys. I want to properly catch up, but I need to be home for a YouTube tasting. And they were like, oh, what's the link? Can we join? And then like all through dinner, they were like checking to make sure that I wasn't going to miss. They were like making sure that I was not going to like lose track of time. And then at 1:15, they were like, Sarah, I think you need to go for your, I don't think they were trying to get rid of me. I think they were just really like trying to just make sure everything was, that they weren't running, I wasn't running late because of them. They're just such thoughtful people. Whereas I'd be in the restaurant, be like, don't worry, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You've got 10 more minutes, Yeah, such considerate, such wonderful people.
So I'm just going to jump one more time between these two glasses here as we start to
wrap up. What was your thoughts? What was the thoughts in the comments?
Well, on the comments, I'm seeing a lot of comments now on the 12-year-old saying mild peat. Definitely getting more of the vegetal notes from the peat of the Connemara. It's they're saying not a fan of peat, but this is sweet and smoky
Yeah.
and it's very nice.
Yeah, really smoky.
Or with a background hint of peat. So definitely, I think concurring with you that the peat is dissipating and bringing through more of those malt content and the herbal contents as well.
Real herbal. Like sometimes we have mintiness to it or something. If I'm nosy in a certain way, I get a really like I'm like, oh, it smells like fresh mint.
I'm finding right at the back that there's a kind of getting through that herbaceousness. Very big that bourbon ex-bourbon wood impact as well in the background, which is really, really delightful. More so again than I get on the I'm actually gesturing under the camera.
I know.
No one can see this. This is what I meant. More so than I get on the Tyrconnell. But a phenomenal viewpoint between the two ends of the Cooley Distillery. I do want to ask you one question before we go, but while I'm asking it, guys, in the comments section, if you were tasting along, let us know your whiskeys in order of 1, 2, 3, because again, everyone's subjective. There's no prizes for best guesses. It's just always nice to see what you preferred on the night. But when you distill peated malt for the likes of Connemara, and then you go off peated malt, do you have to segregate some of the next distillate as lightly peated or peated from like staining of the equipment, or does it just go into unpeated circulation?
No, we're very particular about it. So we will dump our high wines tank, or we'll dump our like weak worts tank.
Yeah.
So we won't use that weak worts. We have 2 separate strong and weak feints. So one for peated, one for plain. We will switch them out. And we do caustic cleans. You know, we caustic clean anyway. All the equipment once a week. So we've never. It's something that I always make sure that I'm nosing and making sure that we're on top of. But we're on top of it anyway. But no, we've never had to do anything like that. We keep it quite separate.
Okay, because they're both
separate, dedicated peated malt silo. So doesn't touch.
Okay.
So it's that when we're not on peated, that silo's empty. Or that silo's not been used.
I get you. No, it's very interesting. I'm very interested to hear you take the feints as well. Do you have separate feint receivers, or is it just you draw the feints? Okay.
Yeah.
So they're as segregated as they physically could be.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say in other distilleries, people wouldn't, I suppose, think about it, but you can't make, if you're running malt and then you swap over to pot still, you have to drain your feints, usually to an IBC or something. So that's what I was assuming you would have done, even though they're both malt, or run the peat into the back of the unpeated rather than the other way around. But it's very interesting. You've separate receivers all around.
Yeah. Keep it separate. So strong weak feints. So that's the roundup. Yeah.
Well, I very much appreciate you giving us your time. I know you were, as you said, entertaining your Suntory guests this evening, and then you came to us. So it's been a busy evening for you.
It's been a great evening. It's been great. This is a perfect evening.
Yeah. I very rarely get to nerd out as much as I did with you tonight on these takeovers. So it was a delight.
Is this a particularly nerdy one?
Well, it's not a particularly nerdy one. I just think that usually I only have a guest for 20 minutes.
Oh, right. Okay, right.
So we only get we talk about the product,
right?
And that's really all you get to talk about. So it was really enjoyable to be able to talk to you about your processes and the way you go about the cask work, because particularly the whiskies we tried is such a glass door into what Cooley produces. Just, I think, led itself very naturally into a very interesting conversation. So all I was saying is thank you.
All right. I think I need to thank you so much for saying that. I think I need to just in general in my life right size my nerdiness when it comes to whiskey, because once there's a technical chat, I'm like, let's go.
No, but I mean, one thing I always try to ensure with this show is that we don't skew into jargon or into something that's too technical, because there's people who watch who are very, very knowledgeable in the industry, our production, maybe distillers or in marketing, There's people who've been, drinking and collecting whiskey for 20, 30 years. And then there's a lot of people who got into whiskey over COVID. And as far as I think tonight went, I think we've been perfectly on the right line. I think everything's been very jargon free and I think understandable. So I appreciate you, and for everyone who's asking the questions as well. A very big thank you. Of course, to the guys at 3 Drams and Irish Malt, a huge thank you to them, because without them, this wouldn't be possible. To everyone who watches at home after the fact, because there's a lot of people in time zones that don't work to watch this live, a very big hello or good night or good morning to you too. But to everyone in the comment section, our German contingents, our Irish contingents, to the guys in the UK, a very big thank you to you. I say sláinte to all of you. Vitaly, I appreciate the kind words. Slava Ukraini. To anyone else who's watching at home, these have been fantastic whiskies. If you don't have a box sitting in front of you, it comes in it has its own shipping box. Like, this is the box it comes in, but it has its own outer shipping box. It's all recyclable, except for this foam. Get rid of the foam, and then everything else is perfectly recyclable. You have a great time. Use them as samples for whatever whiskeys you have. It's a phenomenal service. Get in and touch. Get this to your door, and then you get to meet lovely people like Sarah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. Have a lovely evening. Have a good night.